Chapter 51. Please like, subscribe, and comment. It really helps my motivation to continue writing this story. Chapter 51. There was one food place that they were able to find that had been open in the early morning hours. It wasn't as authentic Italian as Peter would have liked for Mary Jane to experience, but it was enough to do the job of sustaining her, especially since she couldn't eat all that much to begin with. After picking up a meal of Italian meatballs, portobello mushrooms, and Sicilian red oranges to go, Peter followed the coordinates Fury sent to his suit for where the private jet was located and waiting for them at a small, undisclosed tarmac just on the outskirts of Venice. As soon as he leapt over the tall fence surrounding the area, Peter whipped off his mask and slowed his pace as he began to walk the trek across the runway to the parked airplane, Mary Jane cradled in his arms as he carried her bridal style. In one of his fists underneath her, he clutched at the handle of his suitcase. Once they got to Prague, they would focus on buying Mary Jane some of her own things, but until then, she would just have to make do in Peter's clothing, although Peter had to admit, she looked so much better in them than he ever did. In fact, there was something that stroked a primal part located deep in his chest that almost preened at the sight of her wearing his things, almost in a possessive sort of way. It was a strange new feeling for him to experience, though he felt like he was still light years away from banging on his chest like some sort of Neanderthal. It was at that moment where Mary Jane's gut made a watery squelching sound as it squeezed around the nothingness in her stomach. Eyes shooting down to look at her, he nodded his head at the to-go bag she held balanced against her lap. "Go ahead and eat. I've got you steady." Relaxing at the encouragement, Mary Jane nodded, not needing much more convincing to finally sustain herself. Opening the bag, she reached in and produced a takeaway container full of the food along with a plastic fork. As she lifted the top of the container, the waft of food hit Peter square in the nose and he found his own stomach growling. Mary Jane giggled as she too detected the noise. "Oh, good. You're hungry too. I didn't think that I could eat all of this by myself." Taking a look downward at the spread in the large container, Peter surmised that she was right. It was too much food for Mary Jane to handle on her own right now. Wielding the fork, she speared a mushroom and popped it into her mouth, chewing slowly before she poked a meatball and held it up to Peter's mouth in offering. He grinned and bit the meat off of the fork and chewed. Flavor burst on his tongue as he just now realized how ravenous he actually was. When was the last time he ate, exactly? Had it been many hours or days? He couldn't really keep it all straight anymore. Either way, it didn't really matter because he was eating now, and more importantly, so was Mary Jane. Once he swallowed, he grinned down at her. "Thanks, Red." Looking down with a soft smile tickling at the corners of her lips, Mary Jane poked at the food, moving it around a bit with her fork before she decided on a meatball. "Think nothing of it, Tiger. I believe that for the foreseeable future, I may be using you as my human garbage disposal for all of my extra food," she said before she took a bite out of the sphere of seasoned meat. "Oh." Peter deadpanned as he pretended to sober, "That's a mighty serious task. I'm not sure how I'll ever handle it." "You'll manage," Mary Jane giggled as she took an orange slice and popped it into his awaiting mouth. He chewed and the sweet flavor of the fruit gushed over his taste buds. "I know it's not on the same tier as saving the world, but it is a gravely important boyfriend duty that I'd like for you to take seriously." Groaning dramatically, Peter replied in a sardonic tone, "You're twisting my arm here. You know how much I hate food." "Really?" "Because I think I remember your Aunt May saying on that first night that I met you as Peter Parker that she sometimes thought you had 3 stomachs. You know, from all of the food you eat?" The memory of that day popped into his mind. He had been so embarrassed by all of them poking fun at his expense in front of Mary Jane back then, no matter how much the teasing delighted her at the time. Back then, he had wanted so badly to make a good impression of Peter Parker when it came to Mary Jane, so desperately wanting to impress her so that she would look at Peter Parker in the same way that she looked at Spider-Man at the time. As a result, all of the teasing had made him wish that a hole would have opened up in the ground in order to swallow him whole. But now? He couldn't help but think that he's come a long way since then. He felt that he could finally hold his own in their banter, which he has now come to recognize as outright flirting on both of their parts. It made his heart swell just thinking of it. That was an over-exaggeration on Aunt May's part. Spiders have one stomach just like normal humans do. A single brow raised on her forehead. "Is that a scientific fact or are you a special breed?" "Oh. I'm definitely a special breed all right," Peter quipped with a waggle of his brows down at her, which she couldn't help snickering at. They were nearing the stairway to the aircraft now. But I still only have one stomach. Though I promise to take the boyfriend duty you've assigned me very seriously. The last part was said close to her ear as he ducked his mouth near to it, the result being an adorable shiver that shook her entire body. There was a sudden temptation for him to blow air on the outer shell of her ear just so he could watch the reaction again, but he resisted. There would be time for that later, when she's recovered a bit more and after she ate. Good. Can't have you slacking on the job now, Mary Jane mused as she tapped the pointed ends of her fork against those plush, kissable lips of hers. There was another sudden flash of desire for him to replace the plastic utensil with his teeth. Where he would create indents on her skin with the imprint of his teeth as he pulled that bottom lip into his mouth. Her next words pulled him out of the trance that had taken over his mind's eye. You've only just taken up the mantle. He opened his mouth to retort, but that was the exact moment that Fury stepped into the open doorway at the top of the stairs. He used his elevated height to glance downward at Peter with a level look before he crossed his arms. I was betting on a 50-50 chance on you even showing up, let alone getting here on time. An immediate frown marred Peter's lips. He looked downward and shared a glance with Mary Jane before he looked up again at the SHIELD director, his eyes squinting up at him in confusion. I told you I would be here. I keep my promises. At least he tried to. It was one thing that he actually prided himself on. And he hoped that Mary Jane recognized that quality in him too, so that she would sooner realize that he meant it when he said that he wouldn't just abandon her. Right, Fury surmised, his voice emotionless as his single-eyed gaze swept over the two of them. Peter shook his head as he started to make his way up the stairs with Mary Jane. We'll take off as soon as you're settled. Lingering in the doorway of the aircraft, Peter glanced inward and noticed how nearly empty the plane actually was. His eyes surveyed the space, looking for a sign of the only other ally that he had besides Mary Jane throughout this whole operation, only he didn't see anything. He turned his attention back to Fury. Where's Mr. Beck? Fury's lips twisted as he slowly turned away from the outside to face Peter. There was a deep level of mistrust there, like he was expecting Peter to bolt at any given moment now that he no longer had anything to hold over Peter's head in order to control him. He left on the other plane an hour ago. I stayed behind to oversee the rest of the packing of the equipment and weaponry. And to also make sure I made it on this plane too, no doubt? Peter said with a roll of his eyes. He thought that they were past all of this, but he was apparently wrong about that assumption. Fury didn't even bother to deny it. Instead he shrugged one shoulder at him, completely unapologetic. After all of the pushback I got from you, I thought it necessary. Well, it was actually unnecessary, Mary Jane piped up, her voice self-assured as she looked up at Peter with a soft smile. The expression that she gave him caused his heart to start beating double time, the way that her eyes sparkled did things to him. Peter fights because it's his responsibility. Isn't that right, Tiger? At her words, a cold feeling washed over him. And there was also the urge for him to look away from her confident and prideful gaze. Why did he suddenly feel like a fraud? Mary Jane hadn't been in S.H.I.E.L.D.'s underground bunker the last few days. She hadn't witnessed Peter's outright refusal to save the world, even if his doing so was for her sake. But that was only the partial truth, because if he were honest with himself, there was a part of him that knew that he would have refused to help even if Mary Jane hadn't been in danger. Just the thought of fighting a world-level threat again made him want to crawl into a fetal position and rock himself in a panic. Thanos and his army flashed across Peter's mind, and he had to resist the urge to flinch. Forcing himself to keep steady with Mary Jane's expectant admiration, he swallowed and finally managed to force out in a soft voice, "Yeah." Beaming at his answer, she speared a mushroom and offered it up to him. He was glad for the distraction as he took a bite. "Get yourselves settled, Mr. Parker, Ms. Watson," Fury said with a gesturing wave of his hand, allowing them any pick of the spacious seating that was available to them. Peter immediately walked down the aisle, his focus honing in on the lounging chaise sofa that was along the left side wall of the aircraft. It would be the perfect place for Mary Jane to finally get some restful sleep for the first time in weeks. He set her down on the sofa, making sure that she was settled comfortably before he packed away his suitcase in an overhead compartment nearby. Mary Jane kept her gaze on him as he moved close by to her, continuing to eat as she chewed slowly, but her gaze was hyper-focused on his form. Worry niggled at the back of his mind. Was she still afraid that he would just disappear? Hoping to appease any panic within her regarding this before it could even start, Peter took a seat on the edge of the couch right next to her, taking her hand in his and squeezing it once before he took a bite of an orange that he stole from her takeaway container. She grinned at his close proximity, her shoulders visibly relaxing at his touch. "I'll be in the back room for the entire flight," Fury spoke up behind them, and Peter took a moment to glance back at him, confirming without words that he was hearing what the man was telling him. "After what happened with Molten Man, I've got a meeting with General Ross." There was a sharp intake of breath that Peter could hear coming from Mary Jane, and he couldn't help but curse Fury internally for mentioning Mary Jane's father now, when she was obviously still trying to recover from her traumatic abduction. The last thing that she needed now was to be reminded of heavier topics like her father. Peter really was trying his best at distracting her until she was ready to confront all of those feelings. "My dad?" Mary Jane asked just as Peter whipped his head back to gaze deeply into her eyes. He could feel that his own gaze was worried as she stared past him at the imposing SHIELD director. "Is he in trouble?" There was a distinct detection of worry in her voice as she asked this question. His heart clenched at the thought that after everything her father had done, Mary Jane still managed to care. She was more forgiving than some people deserved at times. Slowly, Peter turned his gaze back to Fury and leveled him with a warning glare. He swore that if the man said anything to upset Mary Jane any further than she had already experienced, then he was going to hit him square in the jaw. It was clear by the slight narrowing of his eye that Fury got Peter's message loud and clear. Lifting his gaze slightly up from Peter, his eye softened a bit as he met Mary Jane's uneasy stare. "No. We're just going to discuss future boundaries when it comes to our men going forward. I wouldn't worry about it, Miss Watson." His focus shifted over to Peter for the slightest second before he continued, "But I'll leave you to finish your meal. General Ross is expecting my call any moment now." Nodding at both of them, Fury took the several heavy steps to the back of the plane, bypassing an open door there, where he shut it behind him. It was with a sigh of relief that Peter turned back to facing Mary Jane, glad to see Nick Fury gone. He smiled at her and they both began to pick away at her food again. All the while, Peter was watching her out of the corner of his eye. It would be a lie if he said that he wasn't looking for signs, waiting for her to crack. Their flirty banter was nice, great, even, but Peter couldn't help but think that she was wearing a mask to help make herself feel better about the horrible experience she just endured. On some level, he could get it. She just wanted to pretend like everything is normal. But at the same time, nothing was really normal now, was it? Everything has changed. They weren't just two friends teasing one another anymore. They were in a relationship now. Peter wasn't just her dorky friend, but her boyfriend. And beyond that, not only has 5 years passed, but her new boyfriend happened to also be her superpowered crush, Spider-Man, a revelation that she only just discovered hours ago. All of that on top of having just been rescued from being kidnapped? Peter just couldn't understand how she wasn't already falling apart at the seams. Peter himself would have been freaking out 10 times over by now. But she only ever had episodes whenever someone mentioned Peter going away from her. Did she really see him that much as her protector? It was flattering. And stroked at the part of him that always wanted to impress her. But at the same time, what if he couldn't live up to her expectation of protection? What if he failed at keeping her safe? Of course, he would do his hardest to ensure that wouldn't ever be the case, but he couldn't shake the thought from the recesses of his mind, where it told him that in the end, he would only end up disappointing her on some level. He tried his best to shove the thought away as he stuffed a mushroom into his mouth. Mary Jane didn't deserve these sour thoughts in his head. Not after everything that she's endured. She deserved his support, both physically and mentally. "So," Mary Jane said after a while, breaking him effectively out of his thoughts as he gave her all of his undivided attention, "Are you allowed to tell me anything at all about the mission?" It was clear with one look at her face how curious she was about it, but Peter could tell that she was also trying to hold it back. Just in case she wasn't allowed to be privy to any of the details. But as far as Peter was concerned, she would probably be getting anything that she wanted within his power for the foreseeable future. He just didn't think that he had the heart to deny her of anything, not unless it put her in the direct line of danger. Even if Peter was restricted from telling her the details of the mission, he didn't think that he could hold back from telling her anything. Peter shrugged one shoulder. "I don't see why not. I don't actually report to Fury. I'm still my own man and I'm just doing him a favor, Well, more for Mr. Beck now than anything, but still. Oh. You're your own man, all right. Her eyes gave an obvious sweep up and down his suit-clad body, a spark of appreciation shone through there. Peter flushed as he gave a sheepish chuckle, his hand automatically came up to nod at the hair at the back of his head. Right. Ah. So. The mission. I don't get why it's so top secret. We're not fighting any bad guys. You're not? This was most definitely news to Mary Jane as she blinked in rapid succession at him. Of course, she wouldn't know about the elemental monsters. She had been held captive in a windowless room at the time when the water elemental had attacked Venice. Peter shook his head. No. We're fighting these monsters called the elementals. They are giant monsters that derive from the four elements: air, water, earth, and fire. Mysterio took care of all of them so far except for the fire elemental, which he tells us is the worst one of them all. He's an expert on them, actually. Tilting her head in the most adorable way, Mary Jane asked, How? Peter stole her fork from her grasp and poked a meatball before he fed it to her, wanting her to keep eating before it got too cold. He's fought them before. Mr. Beck, you see, is not from this universe, MJ. I know this is going to sound a little crazy, but he's from Earth, just not our Earth and Earth from a different reality. Immediately Mary Jane coughed around the full mouth of food that she had suddenly gotten stuck at the back of her throat. Her hand came up to pound at her chest as she choked slightly. But before Peter had the time to work up getting worried, she managed to swallow, then instantly asked, Are you serious? Peter nodded, his eyes still roaming her form with concern, though it was slowly ebbing away at the gleam of intrigue shining through her entire expression. It's not actually out of the realm of possibility. The multiverse theory has been around for quite a bit of time. I almost can't believe that I'm able to be witness to the theory being proven correct. When I find the time, I want to pick apart Mr. Beck's brain, just to see how his world works as well as the science behind how he managed to travel between universes. And also his powers. There isn't all that much that I know about them. Is it actually magic that he's wielding or is it all science-based? Staring at him with a mixture of amusement as well as affection, a smile played on those lush lips of hers, though it was clear that she was trying to maintain it. You're adorable, you know that? Peter blinked once at her. What do you mean? Smile broadening, she seemed to melt as her head tilted to the side, shaking her head as she let loose a cute, breathy laugh. I love it when you go off on a tangent like that and go all nerdy science man on me. An unattractive sputter escaped from the back of his throat. Why? It usually annoys the hell out of a lot of people. It was the truth. Peter, more often than not, found it difficult to connect with people at times, especially when he was younger and growing up. Whenever he had talked about his interests, people always stared at him and gave him weird looks until his voice had trailed off awkwardly. The only people in his life that hadn't done this had been Ned, Aunt May and Uncle Ben. He was sure that his parents probably cared about his interests too when they had been alive, but those memories of his life back then were a bit hazy. Either way, people were usually deterred whenever he went off on a tangent on whatever had intrigued him in that given moment. But here was Mary Jane, his girlfriend, telling him that not only was she far from bored of it, but she loved it? As if to further this point, Mary Jane lifted one of her hands and raised it to his cheek. The warmth that he felt there emanated through the pores of his skin, so comforting that he felt the desire to close his eyes and burrow his face closer to her touch. The only thing that stopped him from doing so was the look in her eyes that managed to captivate him. Because I see the passion while you're talking about something that fascinates you, not just in your voice, but in your eyes and mannerisms. Pausing, she flashed him a soft smile as her thumb began to lightly trace at the dark circles under his eyes, there from so many stressful nights of lack of sleep. You put your whole body into talking about it. It's something that I actually admire about you. I know a lot of people who just mosey on through life, not wanting to stop and take the time to appreciate the things around them. But you? You're on a whole other level. You bask in the details, Tiger. A prick at the back of his eyes threatened to sting its way to the surface by producing tears. Never before had he had someone vocally show so much appreciation for just the way that he looked at the world. Did Mary Jane really pay that much attention to how he perceived things? It was so odd, to know that someone besides Aunt May cared so much about what he had to say. He was sure that Ned probably did care, but they rarely talked to each other about their feelings or mushy stuff, only nerded out together on mutual interests. And that really doesn't bother you? Peter felt the need to ask, because if it ever is, just say the word and I can stop. A snort escaped her along with a playful roll of her eyes. Not that I would ever want to stop you, but if I did, I believe that I could think of a better method of interrupting than using just my words. If you know what I mean. A brow raised on her forehead, silently asking him if he caught on to her meaning. And judging by the abrupt lurch deep in the pit of his stomach, he most definitely caught her drift. I see. And would this method still be using your mouth? As he said it, his attention automatically wandered downward to examine the outline of her rose-colored lips. The last time they were pressed against his own felt like a dream. He almost wanted to surge forward to repeat the act just to prove to himself that it was all real. I think that if you just use your imagination you'll be able to figure it out, she practically purred, her voice like silk as she gazed at him with slightly hooded eyes. There was a distinct twitch of interest in the groin area of his spider suit. He had to stifle a groan as he struggled to keep from getting hard while sitting before her in such tight spandex. There would be no hiding the evidence of what she did to him then. He inhaled a deep breath as they continued to stare into each other's eyes. Measurably, Peter started to lean forward and, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Please fasten your seatbelts, we are preparing for liftoff." Peter jolted back as though he had been burned. "Once we are up in the air, and the seatbelt sign is turned off, you may turn off your airplane mode and use the Wi-Fi available for phone use. Thank you and enjoy your flight." A flush crept up his neck as his left hand came up to scratch at the back of it awkwardly. "Sorry," he felt the need to say. Mary Jane bit her bottom lip, holding in her amusement. "No apologies necessary, Tiger. I guess you could say that I'm just glad that I can still cause such a reaction from you. You're as skittish as ever and I still find it hilarious." Har to har har, Peter deadpanned as Mary Jane began to giggle and laugh it up. "I know how much you enjoy teasing me." In all honesty, he was just glad to see her in such light spirits. Her laughter was like a healing balm to his wounded heart after spending weeks thinking that there was a real chance that he would never be able to hear it again. So in the end, he really didn't care that she was laughing at his expense. Just so long as she kept doing it. After that, he helped her to buckle in before strapping his own seatbelt. While they waited for takeoff, they managed to both finish off the rest of the food before Peter took the empty container and placed it on the side table. It didn't take much longer after that for the flight to take off and soar high in the air. The entire time Peter held Mary Jane's hand lightly in his own. It felt nice. Warm. And for the first time in a long time, he had high hopes for the future. When they finally leveled out in the sky, the captain turned off the seatbelt sign. With this, Mary Jane turned to face him, biting her bottom lip as she prepared herself to ask him a question. "Peter, do you have a phone that I can use? To call my Aunt Anna?" It took a second for her words to register with him, and when they did, he gasped. Peter nearly kicked himself for forgetting about the older woman. And Mary Jane mentioning so was like he was getting hit in the face with reality. He had wanted to be trapped so securely in this bubble he constructed with Mary Jane that he forgot that there were people back home that would probably like to know that she was found and safe. Yes, of course. Here. He dug into the hidden compartment of his spider suit, grabbing the device in the pocket before he handed her the phone. Grinning, she took it from his hand before she leaned forward to place a deliberate kiss on his cheek. He'd immediately spread out from the spot she had touched on his skin. "Thanks, Tiger." Two different feelings warred within him at the moment, the part of him that wanted her to explore more with touches on his skin and the part that felt guilty for being selfish and wanting her all to himself. "I'm sorry, I should have thought of it before. In fact, I should really call Aunt May and Ned after you're done. I've just had a lot on my mind." "Think nothing of it, Tiger," Mary Jane interrupted with a nonchalant wave of her hand in the air. "In fact, I'm flattered that I have the ability to distract you so well." The look in her eyes caused a swooping sensation to blossom all the way down to his core. His dick gave another twitch. Gosh, she was so beautiful. She had to know exactly what it was that she did to him. "Oh. You do a great job at distracting me. Feel free to do it as often as you like." In fact, the way that he was feeling right now, he was about to propose that they lock themselves away together in Prague where she could continue to distract him. "Don't tempt me," she hummed in a low voice, the corners of her lips upturned, too soft for him to constitute it as a smirk, but it was almost to that point. I don't have to. You tempt me enough for the both of us, Peter retorted. A surprised and short laugh escaped her before she shook her head at him in amazement. Who are you and what have you done with my shy and stuttering nerd of a boyfriend? Oh, him? Peter chuckled as he relaxed back further into the couch. He got himself the most gorgeous girlfriend and is now feeling like he's on top of the world. At this, she staggered back, blinking at him in surprise. You really feel that way? Everything within him softened at how small her voice sounded when she asked that. Couldn't she see that he was over the moon for her? That he was completely wrapped around her finger? Yeah. MJ, I've felt this way ever since I've met you. She stared at him for an insurmountable amount of time, barely blinking as he could physically see the signs of the gears turning in her head, as if she were trying to work something out. Peter waited patiently, all the while staring back at her in confusion. What about his statement had been perplexing? He thought that his feelings for her had been common knowledge to basically everyone. There had been no hiding his reactions to her whenever he had been in the same room as her. If that's the case, then... She finally began to speak before she trailed off and swallowed, looking away bashfully as an attractive flush colored her cheeks. Then why did you reject me when I told you how I felt before? Peter couldn't help but blink at her. Oh. That's what this was about? No wonder she was so confused. Peter would be as well if he had been in her shoes. You mean when you told Spider-Man how you felt before? Mary Jane nodded slowly at him. Yeah. Sighing, Peter recalled his memories of that night on the balcony, where she had confessed her feelings for his alter ego. It had been both a dream come true and a crushing disappointment for him at the time. Because she hadn't felt the same way for Peter Parker. That was exactly the reason why, he began, and paused as she finally lifted her gaze to meet his again, only for it to display her confusion. He scrambled to clarify. You told Spider-Man you had feelings for him, Sorry, it gets confusing, I know. Regardless, you had feelings for Spider-Man at the time, and not Peter Parker. Of course, somewhere down the road that had all changed. Though. Peter still didn't understand what it was that he had done to manage to get Mary Jane Watson to begin seeing Peter Parker in the romantic sense. But he was far from complaining. Brows burrowing inward, she stared at him for a long moment. What are you talking about? Peter stared right back, his own confusion now openly displayed on his features. What do you mean? Huffing out an incredulous noise, Mary Jane shook her head at him as if asking herself what in the world she was going to do with him. Peter. Don't you remember? I told Spider-Man that night I had feelings for him, but I also said that I had feelings for another boy. Yeah. Peter interrupted, suddenly sullen at the reminder. Harry. He still couldn't fault her for also having a crush on his fast-becoming best friend. Harry really had it all: looks, money, a great personality. Still, it stunned that Peter had to share a part of Mary Jane's affections with someone else. Unless... Did she still feel the same way about him now that she was together with Peter? It was clear to him now that she felt a stronger connection to Peter than to the Osborn heir. She had chosen Peter, after all, but... His thoughts cut themselves off at the violent sputtering noise that escaped Mary Jane's lips, her body jolting back as though his words had somehow burned her. What? Wha? You thought that I had feelings for Harry? Well, yeah? I mean... Didn't you? What he was feeling right then was beyond confusion at that point. Her words just didn't make any sense. It contradicted all of the thoughts that he had for months ever since he had first spotted Harry Osborn chatting up Mary Jane at the bar at the charity ball. But here was Mary Jane, vigorously shaking her head at him in denial to this claim. No. Then wait, Peter blinked rapidly as he tried to work this through in his mind. Then who is the other guy that you have feelings for? For a split second, jealousy reared its ugly head as it threatened to rip out of his chest. Here he had been so focused and concerned about Harry, but now he had to worry about another guy? Mary Jane threw her head back and groaned. You, Peter, Mary Jane stressed, her hands animated as she spoke passionately, I had feelings for you. Somehow, you managed to get me to fall for you twice, while making me think that you were two different people. But Peter broke off as he could only gape at her for an extended moment. The revelation shocked him to his core. But when it was finally started to register in his mind... Man, I'm such an idiot. Peter groaned and his head fell forward into his open palms for a few seconds before his head snapped up to look at her, needing to see her eyes in order to grasp the truth of it all. "I thought you had a thing for Harry." A short, humorless breath of a laugh escaped her as her head tilted at him in a peculiar manner. "Why did you think that?" There were many reasons for Peter to believe this to be true. He had gone over the reasons so many times in his head that it was almost impossible for him to think otherwise. But chief among them was, "Because I saw how close the two of you were at the charity ball. I just assumed, Peter." Mary Jane cut him off with a sigh before she shook her head at him in slight amusement. "He really annoyed me when I first met him, not to mention that the first thing that he said to me managed to offend me. And by that point, you had already wormed your way into my mind and took over every thought. Harry didn't stand a chance at distracting me from my one-track mind. Don't you remember that my sole purpose for being there that night was to try and find Spider-Man again?" Gawking, Peter could only fixate his gaze at her, his mind still working through all of her words and trying to make sense of them. "Ugh. I really am an idiot. You seriously had a thing for me this whole time? Both sides of me? When you told Spider-Man that you had feelings for both him and another guy, and when I assumed it was Harry, I thought." Peter trailed off with a sigh, his shoulders slumping as his gaze dropped downward to focus on his lap. "I thought that you would be disappointed to find out that it was Peter Parker behind the mask. So, I kinda saw it as tricking you into being in a relationship with me if I agreed to date you as Spider-Man." It was quiet for a moment after he finished his own revelation, until Mary Jane's soft fingertips reached under his chin and silently urged his head to tilt upward so that he would lock his gaze with hers. Her eyes were soft and almost sad. "Why are you selling yourself short, Peter?" The lids of his eyes widened as he stared back at her, forlorn and unable to grasp at what to say for several seconds. "Because I never really did have the best track record with girls, let alone friends. For so long, it was just Ned and I. You do realize that you're dating a loser, right?" It probably went against the self-preservation of their relationship to remind her of his loser status, but for some reason, he still felt the need to point it out. It was important to him that she knew all of her choices when regarding him, and yet still choose him regardless. Her lips twisted at his words as the hold that she had on his chin fell so that it landed on his shoulder. She squeezed the tense muscles there. So a lot to unpack here. First off, can I say that I'm glad that you didn't have a good track record with the ladies? It means that you were single and available by the time that I came along so that I could snag you up for myself. And besides that, no. I didn't realize that I was dating a loser. What I did realize was that I was dating a brave, loyal, handsome, charming, witty, funny, smart and sexy guy. Mary Jane. You really think that I would lower my standards and date just anyone? She asked with a raised brow. Believe me when I tell you that you've got it going on, Tiger. Huffing, Peter couldn't help but scoff. But sexy? Really? Come on, be serious. It was Mary Jane's turn to scoff as she rolled her eyes at him in disbelief. The action boggled him. Peter. I've walked in on you wearing nothing but your briefs. Trust me, you're sexy. And don't even get me started on the skin-tight suit. It wasn't just your charming personality that drew me to Spider-Man. I see those muscles that you've got going on and I very much appreciate them. Thank you very much. As if to emphasize this, her gaze did a quick sweep up and down of his body in the spider suit that he still wore. He was quiet as he contemplated this, all the while a slight smile threatened at the corners of his lips. Now, Mary Jane mused as she patted twice on the shoulder that she was touching, I'm going to go and call my Aunt Anna. But I want you to really think about what I said. Stew in it. Please. I want it to really sink into that thick head of yours, all right? The slight smile that he wore grew in the tiniest of increments. Yes, ma'am. Good. She placed another quick kiss on his cheek and then struggled to her feet. Peter made to help her, but she held her hand up to pause him. I've got it. I've got to work on rebuilding my strength. You just sit right there and keep being sexy. Peter laughed. Okay. Now you're pushing it. She merely smirked at him and slowly made her way to the back of the plane, using objects like the other plane seats as a way to aid her in staying upright. Leaving Peter to contemplate her words and what it meant to really confront the fact that Mary Jane Watson really did seem to like him. And it wasn't just because of his alter ego, or the fact that they engaged in nice banter. But for some reason, Mary Jane also liked the way that he looked. Sexy, huh? Mary Jane made sure to position herself in a place where she could still keep her gaze locked onto Peter's form up ahead. Just the thought of letting him out of her sight caused a headache to form behind her eyes as the anxiety took place. It was odd and unnatural to her character. She was usually so self-reliant. It was strange for her to be so dependent on another person's presence in order to keep from falling apart at the seams. It was all right for her to indulge for the time being, she supposed, but eventually she would have to face reality and allow for Peter to spend time by himself. Especially when they got back to New York. Hell, even before then. He would have to go off and fight those monsters in Prague, and she doubted that he would let her tag along for the ride for that confrontation. She would have to cope with being left behind in the hotel room, awaiting his return. It all left an uneasy feeling in her chest, almost tight and constricting. She closed her eyes and forced herself to breathe evenly. Then, lifting Peter's phone, she saw that it unlocked without a passcode and made her way to the contacts app to find her aunt's number. It rang 3 times before the line connected. "Peter?" Her aunt's voice sounded suddenly from the other end of the line, her tone strained with stress and worry. Mary Jane's eyes immediately welled with tears. "Is everything all right? I haven't heard from you for quite some time. Did you find any sign of Aunt Anna?" Mary Jane interrupted, knowing that she had to stop her loving aunt before she had the chance to really work herself up. Mary Jane's voice cracked through her tears. "It's me." A gasp sounded from the other line, followed by an immediate sob. "Mary Jane. Oh my God." "Yes, it's me," Mary Jane said. A watery smile managed to form on her lips as she fell lightly into the nearest chair, her legs no longer having the limited amount of strength that had been keeping her upright thus far. "He's found you," Aunt wept out in celebration. "Peter, I can't believe it. I'm so glad that you're alive." Reaching up to wipe at the quickly cascading tears, Mary Jane replied, "Yeah, Peter, he saved me. He didn't forget about me." What followed was a rather lengthy conversation where aunt and niece caught each other up on everything that's happened since Mary Jane last left New York. To her surprise, she found out that Peter had actually revealed his secret identity to Aunt Anna when he had found out about her disappearance. While Mary Jane skimmed over the details of her captivity and moved on to happier topics that weren't so weighted, like her new relationship with Peter. "Oh really? That warms my heart to hear, Mary Jane, dear. I could just tell by how devoted Peter was in finding you that he had feelings for you. I'm so happy that it all worked out. Are you happy now, dear?" Trying to smother her smile, Mary Jane eyed the boy in question up ahead, who was unaware that he was the main topic of conversation currently. "Yes, Aunt Anna. I am happy. It will take some time for me to recover over what's happened, but I think that I'll be all right so long as I have Peter by my side, supportive as ever." It was the truth. No matter how much Mary Jane longed to regain her independence and get over this mental block that she has, Peter would remain her rock, there when she needed him while also respecting whenever she needed to do things on her own. He wasn't perfect, but he was perfect for her, and that's what mattered most. "I have no doubt that he will," Aunt Anna replied, her voice emanating delight at the thought of their budding relationship. "You should have seen how torn up he was when I told him that you were missing. I don't think that he would have recovered if we hadn't found you." A violent shiver tore through her at the thought of never being discovered from that hellhole. Forcibly diverting her mind away from the awful idea, Mary Jane took a second to just breathe before she was even able to respond. "Yeah. I'm just glad that he was there." "As am I, dear," Aunt Anna said, her voice softened. "So, are you on your way home now? Or are you calling because you and Peter need assistance in that department?" Mary Jane bit her lip and worried it between her teeth for several seconds. Actually, Aunt Anna. We're not coming home. At least, not yet." It was silent for what felt like an insurmountable amount of time. Mary Jane actually brought the phone away from her ear to check to see if the line was still connected. "What do you mean you're not coming home yet?" Aunt Anna said, her voice careful and slow. "There isn't anything for you in Venice, Mary Jane." "Maybe not," Mary Jane countered with a sigh, her gaze forward and trying to memorize the exact shape of Peter's left bicep with her eyes from her current vantage point. "But there is something for me in Prague." "Prague?" "Yes," Mary Jane trudged forward before her Aunt Anna could get another word in. "Prague. Peter was called out on an Avengers mission while we were in Italy by Nick Fury. And rather than sending me home on a plane on my own, we both decided that it was best that I go with him. Avengers Mary Jane, what I? That hardly sounds safe, dear. There was a definitive note of panic in Aunt Anna's voice, which had Mary Jane cringing. She hated that she was causing her loving aunt so much anxiety, especially after everything that Aunt Anna has done for her over the years. I promised to stay far away from the action. I'll stay in Peter and I's hotel room and... Wait, Aunt Anna immediately interjected, you're sharing a hotel room? Mary Jane swallowed, immediate regret taking place in her chest as the color drained from her face. She really hadn't meant to reveal that detail to her aunt. Why, yes. She heard her aunt sigh heavily, and Mary Jane could just hear through the phone that she was mentally counting to 10 in her head. I'm not sure that I'm all right with you staying in the same hotel room as Peter, Mary Jane. It seems entirely inappropriate. Especially now that you're dating? Can't you just come home to New York? I miss you. She missed her aunt too. So very much. There wasn't much that she wanted more than to fall into Annabelle Watson's motherly embrace, soothing away her every fear. That is, one of the few things that she did want, no, need, more was to stay close to Peter's side. To go against that was out of the question. She just knew, deep in her gut, that Tombstone would somehow manage to find her if she wasn't guarded by Peter's protective stance. He was her comfort. Her safety net over rough waters. She sighed. Now to just get Aunt Anna to understand that. I don't think that I can come home. Not yet. Not if Peter can't come too. Aunt Anna, I don't think that my mental state can handle it if I'm separated from him. At least for now. I get panic attacks just at the possibility that he'll leave and I'll be left vulnerable. He's the only thing that's been keeping me from falling apart and actually feel like everything is semi-normal. She could hear the hesitation in her aunt's voice, not entirely convinced just yet. With the two of you dating. Mary Jane sighed. It was clear from her tone exactly what her aunt was concerned about. But really, it was kind of a non-issue. At least for now. We only just got together hours ago, Aunt Anna. I don't think any sort of hanky-panky will happen anytime soon. The most that she could see happening was some more of that kissing that she greatly enjoyed. Peter's lips had felt so soft against her own, but also assertive. The act of kissing him made her feel so warm and protected, all while contradicting shivers and goosebumps burst out all over her body. Nor should it, her aunt harumphed, her tone sounding slightly more appeased by the situation while also managing to come across as scolding at the same time. That's the sort of thing you save for the marriage bed, dear. Mary Jane rolled her eyes. You have nothing to worry about. Honest. I don't think I'm in the right state of mind for such a big step like that anyway. She had just overcome a traumatic event, after all. She didn't want her first time to be in response to the neediness that she felt toward Peter. She wanted it to be special all on its own. Without the crippling weight of her anxiety and fear hanging over them. Are you sure you're all right, honey? There was a definite concern in Aunt Anna's voice. Perhaps Mary Jane shouldn't have mentioned her state of mind. It only worried her aunt more. Perhaps she should be seeing a therapist. But what was there that she could really say? She couldn't divulge anything about Spider-Man. His involvement was so heavily intertwined with the reason behind her abduction in the first place, not that she placed an ounce of blame at Peter's feet for that. If anything, Mary Jane blamed herself. Somehow, she had let it slip to someone in some way that she knew Spider-Man on a personal level, enough for them to justify hiring men to kidnap her in Italy. She would have to take extra care with that going forward. Especially now that Peter was aware that she knew his secret. I will be, Mary Jane tried her best to reassure, once I can get it through my head that Peter isn't actually going anywhere so that I can stop having these involuntary panic attacks while being afraid of my own shadow. I'll be golden. Just. Not golden like Dad's skin kind of golden. The last comment had a questioning lilt to her tone, purposefully dropping the hint to see if her aunt would take the bait and let her know if she knew anything regarding her father. She was glad when her aunt decided to be honest with her. Ah. So you did see your father? Yeah, Mary Jane huffed as irritation swept through her, though she couldn't quite pinpoint as to the reason why. She wasn't upset with her aunt. But did that mean that she was angry with her father? There were so many conflicting emotions that swirled through her just at the thought of him. Last that she saw of him, he was burning down a building with her future boyfriend still inside. So, she really couldn't help but ask in a sort of snappy tone, what was up with that, anyway? Aunt Anna let loose an audible sigh. He loves you, Mary Jane. I know. But Mary Jane paused as she seemed to fall into herself. I guess it's weird. He never really acted like he cared before. It was always like I was nothing but a nuisance to him. Flashes of her memory came back to her of some of his more infamous drunken binges, where he had screamed at her about how ungrateful she was and how expensive it was for him to take care of her. Tears started to sting at the back of her eyes as she tried her best to blink them away. The last thing that she wanted was for Peter to see her crying when she was trying so hard to prove to both him and herself that she wasn't going to break. You don't know that? Aunt Anna said quietly in a careful tone, almost like she was speaking to a woodland creature and that her words would spook Mary Jane off. Mark, he's struggled with alcohol for quite some time. But when he heard that you were blipped 5 years ago, it devastated him. He quit the habit immediately. Mary Jane blinked. She honestly never thought that she would see the day where her father got sober. And it was because of her? Tears welled up at the brim of her lashes now, threatening to spill over. She reached up to rub at her eyes, her voice coming out in a hiccup as she responded, he really hates Peter. She couldn't quite understand why this was so important for her to mention. After everything that her father has done, why should his opinion of her boyfriend matter to her at all? No, I don't think he does, Aunt Anna mused in a soft voice. There is a level of respect that he carries for the boy, but he just worries about you. You don't get to go around being Spider-Man without gaining more than a few enemies. But I've known Peter for many years now, and I don't think that he takes that lightly. He'd do anything to protect you, sweetheart. Smiling through the redness of her eyes, Mary Jane sniffed once. I know. That's why I feel safe with him. Well, I for one approve of your relationship with him. I've known him since he was 7, after his poor parents died and his aunt and uncle took him in. He's a sweet boy. I think that you could make each other happy. Just don't let me hear that you've done the hanky-panky with him, though, because then I might just have reevaluate things. Well, if they ever did have sex, Mary Jane knew now who not to tell. And the way that she felt about Peter. She knew that it was bound to happen eventually, and most likely before marriage even crossed either of their minds. They were only teenagers, after all. And she hadn't been lying when she told Peter her opinions about his body. How in the world did he not see how sexy he truly was? But instead she simply said in a small and dutiful tone, yes, Aunt Anna. Taking her time to traverse the aisle back up toward the front of the plane, Mary Jane returned to Peter's side. He beamed up at her as soon as he noticed her arrival. Hey, how'd it go? The responding grin that she gave him was softer as she shrugged one shoulder at him. Well, she was glad that I'm alive. A brow raised in her direction as his eyes surveyed her, trying to figure out if she was all right. She wasn't quite all right. But she would be as soon as she made contact with his skin once again. I think it would be another issue entirely if she wasn't, he responded. Mary Jane snorted as she took the time to lower herself so that she lay out in his lap, surprising him. She smirked as she thought that he'd have to get used to her boldness. Once she settled, her head resting on his chest and his arms wrapped securely around her, she said, she wasn't too happy about me going to Prague, though. Oh? His voice came out near her ear and the vibrations of it tickled the little hairs she had there, causing an involuntary shiver. Yeah. Well, she wants me to come home, obviously, but she also had an issue with the both of us sharing a hotel room. She peeked up at him then, just in time to catch the beginnings of a flush stemming up from his neck. How can a boy be so cute and hot at the same time? Right. Peter shifted his weight underneath her as his arms around her subconsciously constricted and retracted. Well, it's like I said before. You can have the bed. You need to have the rest to help recover from everything. She nodded and cuddled closer to his chest. Speaking of rest, I'm kinda exhausted. Releasing a yawn, it was one that Peter was automatically mimicking as one of his own echoed hers. Yeah. Me too. I've barely slept ever since we came back from getting dusted. She nodded again, her eyes drooping. The dusting was yet another thing she had yet to come to terms with. But that seemed to be an issue that she could table and resolve at another date and time. We have a lot more to talk about, I know, but a nap first won't hurt, right? His arms tightened securely around her. She hasn't felt this comfortable in such a long time. No. We have all the time in the world now, MJ. Let's take everything one step at a time. Good night, Red. Don't let the bedbugs bite, Spider. He chuckled before her breathing evened out with the hum of the jet's engine in the background, Peter's muscular chest being an exceptional pillow. I thought that after the last chapter, we could all benefit with a little bit of time where everything has calmed down a bit. Especially since there is a storm just off the horizon. Thank you for reading, and please leave a comment below to let me know your thoughts. I appreciate all of you. Less than 3.